All right, so now we have to determine where we want to spawn the players. And remember, we already placed the spawn points here for the terrorist and the counter terrorist. And we already stored those spawn points inside of those arrays. So let's go ahead and take the counter terrorist spawn points and the terrorist spawn points. Let's drag from here and write random. So we have a function called random array item. So we're just going to spawn the player at one of those spawn points by random. So going ahead and selecting one of the spawn points by random, and then we're going to take that spawn point and say get actor transform. Okay, so do the same thing here. We're going to write random and then selecting the get actor transform. So now we have the actor's location, rotation, and the scale. And you can see that if you right click here and split the struct bin, you can see that that spawn point that it has selected by random, you have the location of that spawn point, you have the rotation of it, and you also have the scale of it. I'm going to right click and recombine the struct pin because I actually want to transform. Now, what you can do, real very cool here, is you can drag from this team, and now you can say equal like that and select it here. So if this selected team is equal to, for example, counter terrorist, and let's select this one, BP counter terrorist. So if the player selected the counter terrorist, and what we can do here is we can drag from here and say select and use this one called select. Actually, let's use this one called select transform. But you can also use this one called select, and then you can just place this into here and use this false or right. By the way, this is the same thing. The select transform, it already gives us a boolean. So let's actually just use this one. So let's go ahead and connect it. Now, what it is saying here, let's connect it here. What it is saying is if the team here that has been selected is equal to counter terrorist, if it is true, go ahead and pick A. If it is false, go ahead and pick B. That is what it is saying. So if it is true that I selected counter terrorist, I have to take the counter terrorist points here, and then I have to plug that into A because it is true I have selected the counter terrorist. So I'm going to take the counter terrorist spawn points and plug in the transform here. However, if it is false, it is the terrorist that the player has selected and set it to here. Now, if you have multiple teams for your shooter, you have to use this one called select because this one actually only gives you the option of two. This one gives you the option of more than two. So just as you saw before, if you plug in an enumeration here, it will give you the options of all the enumerations that you have selected. So for now, let's just delete this one. Let's focus on that. And for the team, I'm going to reconnect it up here. I don't know why it disconnected. And let's go ahead and organize things a little bit more. All right, so now it's going to go ahead and spawn that player at random to one of those points, depending on if the player selects counter terrorist or terrorist. Okay, so as you can notice here, for those events, I never select run on server. Again, remember, the game mode only runs on the server. So you don't need to run this on the server or on the client. And by the way, you can never run on the client on the game mode because again, it only runs on the server. So you don't really need to replicate it here. It will automatically run on the server, as well as this here in the player controller, you can see here or notice that I didn't run this on the server as well. Remember what I said before, it is always the server that spawns things into the world. So realistically, it should be run on server. However, remember you are coming from the game mode. The game mode only runs on the server and it runs this spawn player. So this is automatically still on the server. This never runs from the client. This comes from the game mode, which is run from the server. So this one will always be run on server, so you don't really need to replicate that as well. Okay, so now if I go back to the game mode, so now we have this request spawn player, and this actually comes from the player controller. So if I go back here, I right click and make a custom event, and let's call this one select team. So we're almost finished. Select team. And I also want to make another one run on the server called server select team. And this one is run on server reliable. Okay, so now we are going to select a team when we are clicking on the UI. So for this one, select team, I want to run the server select team. So now it's going to run through the server. And for this one, I am going to run the game mode one called request spawn player. Now I can't run the request spawn player because as you can see here, I don't have a blueprint interface for my game mode and I don't have any references to it. So let's go ahead in the next lesson and create a blueprint interface for the game mode.